Today I'm going to talk about what's called a level 2 system, which means that we assume that we have blockchains that work perfectly well. We'll let Itai and Aviv and so on worry about making all the mechanisms work. And we're going to think about what we do with a system where we have working blockchains. So I'm going to talk about atomic cross-chain swaps. Does this thing work?
I ran out of time.
Okay. Today we're going to talk about level 2 systems, which are systems that you build on top of working blockchains. So we're going to treat the blockchains as if they were black boxes. We're not going to worry about whether it's a proof of stake, a proof of work, or whatever. And we're going to think about what we can do when we actually have one. The details are in a policy paper from last year. So our friend Carol owns a pink Cadillac. And she decides she wants to sell it. And of course, she wants to sell it for Bitcoin because everybody knows that Bitcoin is a great investment and much better investment than a Cadillac. So she goes on to Craigslist and says, anybody want to buy my Cadillac for Bitcoin? Now, Carol's friend Alice has a big pile of altcoins, and she really wants to buy a Cadillac. Now, fortunately, they have a common friend, Bob, who owns Bitcoins and wants to sell them for altcoins. Of course, these people aren't really friends. They don't really trust each other. And so what we would really like is to figure out a way to do a three-way trade where Carol gets the Bitcoins from Bob, gives the Cadillac to Alice, and Alice gives her altcoins to Bob. So instead of having a two-way trade, we have a kind of a circular three-way trade here. Now, each of these, the Cadillac, the altcoin, and the Bitcoin all live on separate blockchains. Now, this takes place in the future where cars live on blockchains. So the question is, how can we do a three-way swap? Nobody trusts each other. We don't want to use any centralized exchanges because, of course, we would have to trust them. So we need a way that the three of them can do this three-way mutual swap without involving any single trusted party. Now, it turns out that defining correctness for this is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to give you a fairly simple definition of correctness, and then for the next lecture I'll talk about more general notions of what it means to do correct swaps and transactions in a cross-blockchain world. But we want to say if all parties behave rationally, then all the swaps happen. And by rational, I mean if all the parties follow the protocol. So this is a way of saying that under normal circumstances where everybody behaves and nobody tries to cheat anyone, then we want a kind of liveness. that we want the swaps to take place. But if anybody misbehaves, that is, if anybody tries to cheat or they crash or they're infected with a virus and go crazy, we want to guarantee that none of the parties that behave end up worse off. Now, of course, what I mean by worse off will turn out to be kind of subtle. But for now, we're going to stick with this very informal definition, and later on I'll try to make this more precise. So the idea is that if under normal circumstances where everything goes well, the deal happens. If things go wrong, then none of the honest people get hurt. So in order to do this, we're going to use smart contracts. So this is what makes this a level 2 system. We're not going to worry about the consensus protocols underlying the blockchain. We're not going to worry about subtleties of how the nodes validate blocks and things like that. We're just going to assume that all 3 of the blockchains, which may be very different inside, have the ability to run simple smart contracts. And we saw this content-free technical definition. But again, I want to emphasize that smart contracts are not actually contracts in any legal sense, and they're not particularly smart. It's just simple scripting languages. Again, I'm going to use this slide more than once because it's important. We're going to make use of cryptographic hash functions. Now, all the cryptography that we're going to do here is cookbook cryptography. We're not going to talk about elliptic groups or anything fancy. All I'm going to say is, here are some very simple rules. You follow those, so you don't need to worry about modular arithmetic, prime factorization, any of that nice stuff. So we have a cryptographic function which we apply to x, and we get h of x. And it's very hard to go the other way. So if I give you h of x, you cannot produce an x that will produce the h of x. And this is axiomatic. Everything depends on this assumption. And we're going to use these to build something called the hash lock. Hash locks show up not only in swaps but also in payment channels and other places. So it's a very useful idea. One of the initially confusing things is that if you want to cite the origin of hash lock, if you trace it back, trying to figure out who invented this, it turns out you end up at a conversation on I think it was a Reddit somewhere, where somebody says, hey, wouldn't this be a good idea? So if you look up the citations in the Podsy paper, there's a citation for a particular page of a Reddit transcript where a particular person had this idea. And I tried really hard and I can't find any other older citation. So the idea is there's a secret S, which is kind of like a one-time secret key. We're going to create the secret and then eventually we're going to release it. So it's only good for one particular transaction. And the hash lock is h of x, S. And so this we can distribute all we want because there's no way to go from h of s to s. And so we're going to set up the transaction using this, and then we're going to trigger the transaction by releasing the secret when the time comes. And so we're going to build contracts of this very simple form, which says that I, the contract, know h of s, and I will give you custody of an asset, which could be currency, it could be title to the Cadillac, if you can prove to me that you know s by sending me s. And so this is 1 or 2 lines in a smart contract. And so the only computational power we need is the ability to execute this kind of contract. So we don't need recursion, we don't need full Turing computability. We just need the ability to say, if h of this matches that value, then transfer the money or the card. Now, of course, we also need a time lock. It's the nature of smart contracts, as I said, that they are not very smart. And if you simply set up a contract that says, I will give you the money when you give me the secret, and you never give them the secret, then nobody ever gets the money. And so one way you can do kind of denial of currency by setting up such a contract and then never responding. So we have to have some way of saying, well, if somebody doesn't answer in time, then you get your money back. So we have to be able to refund funds. So what we end up is what's called a timed hash lock contract, which says that if you prove to me you know the secret within a certain amount of time, then I give you the money. If you don't say anything by then I get my money back. And this is the essence of how to do swaps and other more complicated cross-chain transactions. This is going to be a synchronous protocol in the sense that we assume that there's some quantity of time, big delta, which isn't long enough to guarantee that if I publish something on a blockchain, then you will notice it within time, big delta. And this is a safety requirement, so that if this is violated, then you can steal somebody's money. So we absolutely require that this happens. Delta can be very large because nobody ever has to wait for delta unless things go wrong. So if everyone is honest, then delta doesn't matter because everybody trades as quickly as they can and everyone is motivated to trade as quickly as they can. The only time when delta matters is if somebody is suddenly unresponsive. You know, it's like in one of these spy movies where the agents meet in a cafe somewhere with a suitcase and they're getting nervous because the other side doesn't show up. And so in that case, the delta matters because that's how long you have to wait before you get your money back. So in some sense, in any realistic sense, you can make delta, you can have delta be a week. And so in the worst case, your money is tied up for a week before you get it back. But under normal circumstances, you can't tell whether delta is a week, a month, or what. Okay, so let's do a sort of a toy version of this swap. So we start out, Alice has a secret. So she creates this secret S, and she publishes H of S. So she knows her secret, and she's willing to tell everyone what the hash lock is. And let's say this happens at some base time t. So it turns out that probably the hardest aspect of these swaps is getting the timeouts right, because you can use timeouts as a kind of a weapon to cheat other people. So Alice starts out, and she publishes a contract with Bob. So this is the altcoin blockchain. And so she puts a contract on the blockchain saying, pay altcoins to Bob with hash lock H and time lock 6 times delta. So it says that if Bob shows up with the secret, then he gets custody of the altcoins. If Bob doesn't show up in time 6 delta from when the protocol started, then Alice gets her money back. And why 6? Well, we'll see why 6. And we know that this completes by time t plus delta. So it should complete much, much faster, of course. But by the time t plus delta, Bob will have noticed that contract appears on the blockchain. So now Bob sees that contract is there. After Bob sees that this contract is in place, and of course, once this contract is posted on the blockchain, it's irrevocable. Alice can't change her mind at that point. She's put those altcoins into escrow. So those altcoins are locked up. Alice can't get them back. Bob can't get them until he produces his secret. That after Bob sees that Alice has put up the contract, and the order in which this is done is important, Bob says, okay, it's now safe to post a contract, to publish a contract on the Bitcoin blockchain, which says take these Bitcoins and put them into escrow, meaning that Bob no longer has direct control of them, with hash lock H, meaning that they'll be unlocked if somebody releases the matching secret, and with time lock 5 delta. And this is finished before time t plus 2 delta. So everybody is very carefully building up the contracts, but you don't put your contract on the blockchain until your predecessor puts their contract on the blockchain. So this is a very careful. You should think gangster movies where people are taking guns out of pockets and putting them down. Oops. Okay, then when Carol sees that Bob has posted his contract, she puts a contract on the car registration blockchain that says, okay, pay transfer ownership of the Cadillac with hash lock H and time lock 4 delta. So each time we go around, we bring the time lock, we reduce the time lock by a delta. So this contract says that if Alice produces the secret that matches H before 4 delta time elapses from the present, then Alice transfers the title of the Cadillac. Otherwise, if Alice is silent, then Carol gets the Cadillac back. So at this point, all the contracts are in place. And we've used up a time basically 3 delta. So now Alice is happy. Alice knows that she's safe at this point because all the contracts are there. So now Alice triggers the contract. So Alice reveals S. And when she reveals S, Carol can see that. So now Carol learns S. So what Carol is, what Alice is doing is Alice is saying, okay, here's the secret, give me the Cadillac. That triggers the transfer of the Cadillac, but it also, because it's on a public blockchain, reveals S to Carol. So there's this magic here where the act of claiming the Cadillac reveals the contract. So now Carol reveals S because now she wants her money. And so that means that Bob now sends the Bitcoin to her. But now because Carol has published this secret onto the blockchain, now Bob knows what S is. And there is no way that Carol can trigger the contract without revealing the secret to Bob. And this is, in some sense, the source of the atomicity. Now Bob has learned S. And now Bob reveals S on this blockchain, and Bob gets his altcoins. So we go in 2 phases, one where each one carefully posts a contract. Each party looks at the contract and says, yes, that's the contract that I was expecting. When all the contracts are in place, then one party reveals the secret travels around in the opposite direction, triggering each of the contracts as they go along. And if you do the math, everything should complete before a T plus 6 delta.
If it's posted on the blockchain by Alice, then Bob knows it immediately. Bob knows
That's
it's
okay.
Delta.
That's okay. I'm talking worst case here. Then things happen even faster. That's better. Because it's inevitable, once Alice reveals her secret, it's inevitable that the secret, everyone will learn the secret. If they short circuit the secret, then it's okay. So I'm just giving you kind of the worst case where you only pay attention to the blockchains you're involved in. You don't spy on the one that you're not involved in. But but really what you want to do is you want to, everybody, you should broadcast the secret as quickly as possible. So in order to kind of there's a lot of subtlety here that might not be obvious. Yes?
How do you decide who starts the chain? Who puts the gun down the table first?
So you do have, everybody has to kind of agree on when things start so that they have the same timeout. Everybody has to agree on the deal. So I'm assuming there's some market clearing service where they agree beforehand, okay, starting at 1 o'clock, we'll execute this car sale contract. So there's, everybody has to kind of agree what the deal is to begin with. And that we can assume there's some centralized service that does that. You don't have to trust it because everyone can look at the deal and say, I don't like this, and walk away.
Someone has to be the first one to have the secret to create the...
Yeah. So in this case, it's Alice, but it could be anyone because Alice posted the first contract. So they decided that Alice is going to start. It could have been any of them because it's all symmetric. But the execution has to be asymmetric in the sense that there has to be an order in which these things are done. And in fact, the order is kind of delicate because if we change the order a little bit, then you can pick someone's pocket. So there are a couple things that could go wrong here. So here's the contract. So we're posting these contracts, and now Carol crashes before she posts the final contract. This is one thing that could go wrong. In the first phase, Alice posts her contract. Bob looks at this, says, okay, that looks good, I'm going to post this, and then Carol never responds. In that case, then this contract will eventually time out. That's the time lock part of the hash time lock. The refund the money back to Bob, and then the earlier contract, which had the longer timeout, will also time out. So what happens in this case is everybody gets their money back. Now, Alice and Bob were honest in the sense that they followed the protocol. Carol deviated from the protocol by crashing. Now, deviating from the protocol could be the result of being evil. It could be the result of being unlucky. But the protocol says that you have to respond within a certain amount of time. And if you deviate from that, you might lose. So here, Alice and Bob are no worse off, other than the inconvenience of having their assets locked up temporarily. So everyone is still safe if somebody crashes. Yeah.
And they have to pay fees basis blocks, those contracts on the block.
Oh, yeah. You have to pay fees. We're assuming those are negligible. So there's the inconvenience of having your asset locked up, and there's fees that you have to pay for the failed transaction, but that's the cost of doing business. What we're really worried about is we don't want Bob to lose all his money. So for the important things, we want to make sure that we're safe. So the claim is that everyone gets refunds if somebody crashes during the first phase when we're publishing the contracts. What else could go wrong? So let's go to the triggering phase where Alice reveals her secret, collects her blockchain. Carol reveals the secret and collects her Bitcoin, and now Bob crashes. So at this point, Bob is out of luck because he doesn't claim his altcoin, even though if he were awake, he could. And so then what happens is that Alice gets both her money back and the Cadillac. Now this seems kind of harsh, because maybe Bob was the victim of a denial of service attack, but he deviated from the protocol. And so by our kind of merciless calculus, Alice and Carol conformed, and they're no worse off. Alice is a lot better off. But the honest parties are no worse off. The ones who deviated can lose, but we don't care what happens to them because they deviated from the protocol.
If you publish the secret on the blockchain, what prevents somebody from the outside coming and say, Alice, give me your money, because I know the secret?
Oh, the contract can say, I'm only going to pay Ellie if Ellie gives the secret.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So in this case, now, the exact same thing happens in the Lightning Network. And the people who run the Lightning Network will cheerily sell you what they call a watchtower service, which is basically you hire a server from Amazon, which is guaranteed to be up 24/7 and will act on your behalf and claim your reward when that secret is revealed. So there are kind of pragmatic ways to fix this, but technically, if you crash at the wrong point, then you're violating your agreement, and it's morally okay to take all your money. Now, remember we said we were careful about the order in which contracts were deployed.
If B crashes after posting the contract but before claiming, would C be able to claim on the contract even if B's crashed?
So here you're saying if C crashes,
No, B posted the contract.
B posted the
and then crashed.
and then crashed.
Can C claim the contract?
C cannot claim this contract.
No, but
Oh, this contract, yeah. So Bob loses his money, and let's see, yes. So Bob loses his money, but does not get the Bitcoin.
so the contract stays alive even if you're dead.
The contract is passive. It just sits there. It's like a mousetrap, and it will be set off until it times out.
Why can't the contract?
Could you disable the time lock by matching contracts that once they've been validated, you can ensure that at some point in time the original contract will be met, so that even if B crashes and doesn't answer in delta time.
Well, no. There's kind of an inescapable trade-off here. So contracts, you might say, well, maybe I could set this contract so that it could tell whether S was revealed anywhere else. But a smart contract can't directly observe any other blockchain. A smart contract can look at its own state, but it can't make remote calls. Because if you sort of think about how that's done, say on Ethereum, they speculatively execute something. It has to be deterministic, and then maybe it gets on or maybe it doesn't. So you can't make a remote procedure call from a smart contract.
You could do it if it was on the same.
It was on the same chain, yeah. But here they're different chains. So you need someone to actively push. Now, of course, Carol could help out Bob by revealing the secret, but why would she? Because she can, everybody here is rational and cynical, and so Carol's not going to help out Bob because Carol might, earn more if Bob fails. So this is not something you do with your friends. So the contract deployment order is important. Remember, we deployed contracts here, here, and here. But imagine for some reason we were to deploy. Suppose Alice posts her contract prematurely. So Alice doesn't wait for Bob to post the contract. And so now we're in this position. Alice opportunistically reveals her secret now and grabs the Cadillac when she sees this. Bob grabs the altcoin. And Carol is stuck because there's no contract here. So this is why you have to be extremely careful, and you don't post your contract until your sort of predecessor posts theirs.
Does the fact that the order is important depend on the fact that time locks are relative? Can we use maybe absolute time locks, for example, on midnight next day, all contracts time out, and then it doesn't matter in which order we put it on the blockchain?
So that won't work for other reasons, but here what happened was there's no contract. So it doesn't matter what the contract does if there's no contract here. So what happened here was Alice is supposed to post her contract. Bob is supposed to post his contract, and then Carol posts hers. But Carol prematurely posts her contract before there's anything here. So it's a little bit like if you're in a market and you want to buy an apple, you should ask how much the apple costs before you take a bite out of it. If you take a bite out of it first and then ask how much it costs, it could be expensive. So all that's going on here is that there's a trap here where if you deploy the contracts in the wrong order, then someone can steal your money. Now the problem with giving everybody the same timeout is that I could trigger a contract at midnight minus epsilon, and then you wouldn't have time to respond. In fact, that's the next example. So the contract deployment order is very sensitive. Time lock calculation. So here, we're going to do exactly what you said. We have a 5 delta timeout on this contract and a 5 delta timeout on that contract. So they're the same timeout. And you can kind of guess what's going to happen. So here, at time 5 delta minus epsilon, Carol reveals her secret to get the Bitcoin. Then immediately afterwards, because there was only epsilon, the other contract times out. And Bob doesn't have time to respond. So this is why we need to stagger the timeouts by delta on each round, because otherwise I can grab the resource right before you time out, and then you won't have time to respond and grab your own resource. So the timeout calculation is very sensitive because it can be used as a weapon. So at this point, Bob loses because he doesn't get his altcoin, but his bitcoins have been taken.
So how exactly does the timeout work, right? Because the chains don't know time.
The chains can estimate time by looking at the block height. And so so for example, if you're writing in Solidity, there's something called now. And if you write a program with now, the Solidity compiler will stop you and say, hey, this can be manipulated to a certain amount by the miners. But that's why you want delta to be big. So you want plenty of time to make sure that that you can't play these kinds of games. Your delta has to be big enough to work for all of the chains. Yeah, 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 yeah. And again, if everything under normal execution, delta doesn't matter because delta is just when you panic and and run for the exit. That's when you realize that you've been double crossed by the other gangsters. Yeah, there's one secret. Later on, when I talk about more complicated examples, we are going to need more than one secret.
You can't Bob listen to the car dealership chain and learn S when they reverse it?
If he's smart, he will. But in this case, we're assuming that he can't and he gets cheated. So if you can short circuit. It's always safe to reveal. Once the secret has been revealed, it's always safe to tell everyone about it. But in case that there's some kind of delay and it doesn't go through, these are ways in which things can break if we don't do things carefully.
Everything is well if Bob cashes his money before Carol, right? Okay.
Yes. So if things go in this order, then everything is okay. So the standard protocol, you can short circuit S and give it to everyone right away, and there's no harm. If S goes at the slowest possible speed and you do things in the wrong order, then this is one path to a disaster. And so what I want to emphasize here is that the protocol looks pretty simple, but if you change even one little thing, then somebody can be cheated. Yeah.
Can you repeat why it's best to reveal, to broadcast your secret as
So what I've described a kind of conservative story where Alice sends her secret here, and then Bob or Carol sends a secret here, and then Bob puts it here, and then everything works. But if the secret propagates asynchronously, then the things are triggered out of order. But that's okay because in the end, everyone gets their money. The danger happens when some contract times out when another one is triggered. So what we want to guarantee is that the contracts, if everybody is honest, then either all the contracts are triggered or no contracts are triggered. And all of these complications here, somebody is deviating from the protocol. Because this is not a distributed Oracle database where everyone is running the same code and working for the same company. These are independent parties who don't trust each other, and we have no idea. We can tell you what the protocol is. I have no idea what you're actually going to do. And I know that if you can cheat, you will, and so will I. So all we can say is that if you follow the protocol, then everything is okay. If you don't follow the protocol, then except for minor inconveniences, if I'm honest, I can't lose.
Is there a way, I guess the answer is no, but I'd like to understand how for A and B to cheat?
No, they can't collude. They can do weird and crazy things like one can give the other the money and not collect the Cadillac, but they're cheating, and so if they end up in some weird state, we don't care, because we can only possibly make guarantees about conforming, honest players.
What are the considerations for setting delta? For example, it needs to be enough time to communicate, but also, for example, you need enough time so you can do a congestion attack on the chain, and then Bob can't, or one of the
So delta has to be long enough to guarantee that if I publish something, then you'll notice it on all of the chains, and that includes questions about finality. That includes plausible denial of service attacks. So this is one interesting research area is, can we get rid of this? If you look at Lightning, if you look at earlier pairwise swaps, they all make this assumption. Lightning is a totally synchronous network in that sense. If you crash at the wrong time and you're in the Lightning network, you'll be cleaned out. And so this is common to any hash time lock algorithm, and I think it would be really interesting if somebody could either prove this was necessary or come up with something better. Oops. Irrational behavior. So we don't assume that everybody's rational. We say if you're rational and well behaved, we give you guarantees, but we don't. But you have to be guaranteed against irrational behavior. Some of these parties might, belong to a hostile foreign government, which is happy to lose their money if they can disrupt your system. So you have to be protected against that sort of thing. So here, for example, Alice reveals her secret before the contract is in place. There's no reason she should ever do this. But what happens if she does? If she does this, can she damage Bob and Carol? So Alice can damage herself, we don't care. But can she spitefully cause problems for Bob and Carol? So in this case, what happens is she reveals the secret. The two of them collect their, grab their assets. And but there's no reason for Carol to give Alice the Cadillac. So in this case, by acting irrationally, Alice has only damaged herself. The other two end up better off than they would have. So one thing we learned from this is that traditional distributed transactions, people talk about all or nothing. Either everything happens or nothing does. But this, as a correctness property, makes no sense in the blockchain world. Because here, in some sense, this is neither all nor nothing, and yet we're happy with it. Because the misbehavior has been punished. The good parties get their reward. So it's much more of a kind of a moralistic notion of correctness than kind of standard database, mechanistic all or nothing properties. And this is something I'll talk about in the second lecture this morning. Okay, if all parties conform to the protocol, then all swaps take place. So I replaced the word honest with conform. So there's no notion of honesty, being honest or dishonest. Either you follow the protocol or you don't follow the protocol. If some parties deviate from the protocol, and deviation could either be deliberate evil doing, or it could be, sorry, you crashed, then no conforming party is worse off. And of course, as soon as I say worse off, you should be wondering what exactly does that mean, and I'll get to that. And there's a third, more subtle condition, which says that no coalition has an incentive to deviate, which says that when we set up the deal, there's no coalition that has a rational reason to do anything else. And that's actually independent of the other two.
Is that something that you want, or is it something proved of the protocol?
This is something your protocol, this is something we want the protocol to have. The third one is actually kind of subtle, because that says don't set up a deal that doesn't make any sense. So if I set up a deal, where you give 5 euros to Yuda and nothing else happens, that's a dumb deal because why would you sign up to do that? You have every incentive to cheat, and no protocol is going to make that to happen because I can't force you to follow the protocol. So we're going to rule out nonsensical protocols because there's no there's no way you can enforce that.
And how do you go about proving? I mean, you assume some finite possibility of actions.
We'll do that. Okay, when is it possible to set up one of these complicated multi-way swaps? When it's possible, what's an algorithm that does that, and how much does it cost? The basic questions. Okay, so we're going to talk in the language of directed graphs. This is standard stuff you've seen before, but I'm going to give you the terminology to make sure that we're talking, you can understand me. That's a vertex. That's an arc. That's a path. Paths don't have cycles. A cycle is a circular path. One vertex is reachable from another if there's a path from one to the other. You're strongly connected if there's a path from any vertex to any other vertex. Feedback vertex set, this is the important and somewhat obscure, is a set of vertexes in a graph where if you remove them, the result is no longer strongly connected. So that's going to be important. You remove a feedback vertex set and what's left is not strongly connected. Okay, what's a blockchain? Blockchain is, repeat after me, distributed ledger. Clients publish transactions. We have smart contracts. The algorithm, by algorithm I mean we don't care, we fully trust Itai and Aviv to get all that stuff they talked about right, and so we're not going to look under the hood. And we could set up a proposed swap as a digraph. So here, every vertex represents a party. Each edge is an asset that they're willing to transfer. And they all went on to, Carol is willing to transfer a gold coin to Bob, and David is going to send a stamp to Carol, and so on. So somehow we set up this deal where everybody is going to transfer something to everyone else.
If I'm not mistaken, I wanted to make sure. I know the notion of feedback set is it cuts all the cycles in the graph.
Mm-hmm.
You
Same
say
thing.
It just is not strongly connected, which is different.
No, it's the same thing.
The cycle in the graph, the cycle is strongly connected, but the graph is not strongly connected.
Oh, a feedback vertex set in a strongly connected graph. So this is a swap, example swap. And question is, when can we do this swap under the usual assumptions that nobody trusts anyone else, etc. So this is, right, we have each vertex is a party, each arc is a proposed asset transfer. We need a little bit of game theory. Our game theory here is all cookbook game theory. It's like the crypto. We're just going to use definitions. We're not going to use any interesting theorems. So a swap is a cooperative game. A protocol is a strategy. A protocol says, here are rules you can follow. Parties can form coalitions, meaning that this is the Sybil attack. So you might have a bunch of parties which are secretly all controlled by the same evil genius, by the same Bond villain, and we have no way of telling. So it's possible that a coalition will follow some strategy that would individually disadvantage members of the coalition, but actually they're all controlled by Blofeld. So so we have to worry about that. The result is called a payoff. And so here are the different outcomes. So now I'm going to tell you what I mean when I say you're no worse off at the end. So one outcome we'll call free ride. That says that I'm in the swap, one arc is triggered. I get one asset that I was promised. I don't pay anything. The deal goes wrong. The police come in, I grab the suitcase and I run out. So I end up being paid something, but I don't have to pay anything myself. So I get something for nothing. That's one possible outcome when things go wrong. A discount says that I get all of the assets I was promised, but somehow, maybe poor unfortunate Bob who crashed at the wrong time, something that I promised doesn't get claimed. So I might have to pay some of the things, but I get everything I wanted, I pay less than I intended. So that's called discount. That means I got what I wanted, but it was cheaper than I expected. A deal is kind of a normal outcome. I got everything I wanted, I paid everything I promised. So that's what that's sort of the outcome under the normal case. That was a successful deal. No deal is nothing happens. That's like, the transaction is canceled. And the worst thing is something we call underwater, which says that there's something I didn't get that I was promised, but I did have to pay something. So that's kind of a chaotic outcome. That means that I didn't get everything I expected to get, yet I had to pay. And we're going to assume that that makes you unhappy. There might be circumstances where you're okay with it, but in general, that's not acceptable. So we can rank each of these payoffs. So a deal has to be better than no deal, because otherwise you wouldn't have signed up to do the transaction in the first place. You must feel that if you did the trade, you'd be better off. So you prefer deal to no deal. A discount is better than deal, because you got everything you wanted, but you paid less. A free ride is better than no deal, because you didn't pay anything, but you got something. And underwater is worse than everything. And so what we'll do is we'll say everything above here is acceptable, this is unacceptable. So when we say you're no worse off, we say that at the end of a deal, at the end of executing, you end up somewhere up here in one of these states. but you never end up down here. So this is the sort of game theoretic explanation of what we want the swap to do. And again, notice this is very different from your usual distributed database idea where it's all or nothing behavior, because this isn't all or nothing. This is you get cheated, or you end up no worse off, or you gain something somehow in a complicated way. Yeah.
I guess this kind of depends on your personal utility function. Underwater might be better if you get something you really want to pay something you don't.
That's true, but under some circumstances, you could have made a kind of a simpler deal if that were true. So if there were cases where you didn't really care about all your inputs, then you could have made a simpler deal where you didn't do that. And so you're right that this is not entirely. We're assuming here that we know only kind of the most obvious things about your utility function. I mean, you could have a utility function where you're promised 3 things, but you're happy if you get 2 out of 3. And basically, we don't try to deal with that. We just assume that that's unacceptable. And so the protocol just guarantees that if there is a particular underwater deal that you're okay with, you're not going to get that. So it's not the case that you still can't cheat anybody. It's just that there might be one favorable outcome according to your idiosyncratic thing that you can't get. But this is an argument that no matter what your deal is, no matter what your utility function is, if it's not crazy, then it sort of matches this.
You're missing one case, right? In the case where you get nothing, but you give stuff.
If you get nothing, but you pay something, then you're underwater.
That is inside of
Yeah.
If you can, when you do things, if you can illuminate what is new here in the sense that we investigate it now after Satoshi, and this question does not exist if just we have signature and we can go always to some judge and say, look, I have a signature that he said this and this, and something happened. So what
welcome to the libertarian paradise. We don't have we hanged all the judges when we took over the.
So essentially, we replace judges by the chains. That's what's happening here.
Yep, that's code is law, man. Oh, deal. No, discount. No, it's the other way around. Discount is better than deal. So higher is better. So discount is better than deal because you paid less.
Aren't you talking about the benefit of the overall system?
No, I'm talking about the benefit of an individual. We don't care about the overall system. Libertarian paradise is all about me. So each individual here is doing this calculation. And so what we guarantee is that if you conform to the protocol, you end up somewhere above here. Where you end up depends on the behavior of the non-conforming parties. So if everyone behaves, then you end up here. If something goes wrong, we try to put you up here. But if someone is both evil and incompetent, you could end up here.
Also, just a minor point, shouldn't free ride be strictly better than discount?
Shouldn't
Free ride be strictly better than discount?
That's intuitively you might think so, but I couldn't think of a really rigorous argument for that. And so, but in some sense it doesn't matter, because all we're saying is that you end up somewhere here, and it doesn't matter which one. All I want to do is show that these are better than no deal, which is better than underwater. Okay, so sort of more technically, we'll say a protocol is uniform. We say if all parties conform, then everyone ends up with a deal. If any coalition deviates, then no conforming party finishes with payoff underwater. That's 2 out of our 3 conditions. Our last condition was that no rational coalition should deviate. We'll talk about that separately. So notion of a strong Nash equilibrium says if everybody follows one strategy, then everything is good. If a coalition deviates, that it won't improve its payoff. So that says that we all have a default strategy. Everyone over here, they conspire and they say, let's do something else. And they can't find something that will make them better off. So we say that a protocol is atomic. And next lecture, I'm going to change this because I'm covering up a few subtle issues here. If it's uniform and a strong Nash equilibrium. So it turns out that these are independent properties. You can be uniform and not be strong Nash equilibrium. And what does that mean? Well, so if the swap graph, the swap digraph, is strongly connected, then any uniform swap protocol is atomic.
What is uniform?
Uniform says that if all parties conform, then everything works. If any coalition deviates, nobody ends up worse off. But it doesn't say that rational parties have an incentive to behave. So again, a trivial example of something that satisfies this is I'll give you $5 and you don't give me back anything. So if everybody conforms, that means we do that. Everybody ends up the same. And there's if somebody tries to deviate, then no rational party is underwater. Just. So this is connected with sort of the topological notion of the swap digraph. You remember that digraph with all of the provos. If that's strongly connected, then following the protocol is a Nash equilibrium. So the proof sketch, which I'm not going to do, says that if we have a deviating coalition, if anybody in that coalition gets a better payoff by deviating, then some honest party must have been cheated. Their gain had to come from somewhere. It must have come from an honest party. Therefore, your protocol wasn't uniform to begin with. So it's an argument by contradiction. And it requires strong connectivity. The other side is kind of cute. So it says if the digraph is not strongly connected, then no uniform protocol is atomic. Yeah?
Can you remind the definition of string connected?
Strongly connected says there's a path from between any two vertices along directed arcs.
End of atomic.
Beg pardon?
And the definition of atomic.
The definition of atomic says if everyone is honest, then it happens. And if anybody deviates, no good person gets cheated. So here we have a weakly connect. What I want to say is that if the swap graph is not strongly connected, then there's an incentive to cheat. So here we have a weakly connected swap graph. And this has a subgraph U and a subgraph V with the property that there is an arc from U to V, but not the other way around. And in this case, if you think about this in terms of a deal, there's something weird going on here, right? Because arcs go from U to V, but not vice versa. That means that parties in U are paying things to parties in V, but they're not getting anything back. And so that means that the parties in V are kind of free riders. They're collecting things, but they're not giving anything. So a rational thing for parties in U to do is is not to send anything along this arc and pretend they did. And so this is an example of a deal that in some sense it doesn't make any sense. And rational parties have an incentive to cheat in this case. And so it turns out that if you set up a deal and the graph is not strongly connected, then somebody has an incentive to cheat someone else. If it is strongly connected, then nobody has an incentive to cheat. So U has a better payoff to defect and not deal with V. But if you think about it, there's no reason you would have agreed to do this deal in the first place. But technically, this says that we can restrict our attention to strongly connected swap graphs.
And what if you had an edge from the leftmost pink to the top yellow?
Then it would be strongly connected.
No,
but still,
You would then the set of freeloaders might change.
What?
If it's not strongly connected, then there are freeloaders. There are free riders. So if you add the colors might
I
change.
don't say anymore that there is a subgraph that switch the other because
If it's not strongly connected, there is always this partition.
So this way the subgraph will go down to this. Okay.
All you're doing is you're changing the subgraph.
So this is the case of maybe a lightning transaction going through, right? It's not always
Well, Lightning isn't really a swap because you're not. So in Lightning, so what's your incentive to participate? Your incentive is different. You're getting a fee for passing things on. So that would be a different model.
Or there is something, and I guess the loop is also closed by something external that's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you could still have a notion of succeeding to ensure that everybody executes a Lightning deal, right? Or maybe it somehow breaks when you have several targets.
No, so in Lightning deal, there is this closed loop with a timed hash lock where, in some sense, you get paid in the end. Here, the only payment you get is the swap.
Regarding the link of the subgraph, there is a point in the circle that will not get anything if it just links to like the subgraph B.
Mm-hmm.
It got connected to subgraph B.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the yellow or the down point. So this point is going to this point.
So if you put this here, then I think it's now strongly connected.
No, it's not, because there's the point in the middle of the yellow when you go.
There's another yellow.
Yeah.
Oh, there's another. Then you do the analysis again, and we can still break it down.
Okay, so it wouldn't be incentivized to participate in anything, but it would be giving anything.
Yeah. So there's several cases you can make, but if it's not strongly connected, then there is going to be some freeloading subgraph, and then the others have a rational incentive to basically cut them off because they're sending things out, but they're not getting anything back. And so since you can't force anybody to do anything, they should just some strongly connected subcomponent of yellow graph should just do a deal among themselves. They're better off, either the same or better off if they do that deal. And so there's no reason that they would have done the bigger deal. But what that says is that there's this connection between the digraph topology and whether your deal makes sense or not. Okay, so uniform swap protocol is atomic if and only if D is strongly connected, which means we don't need to worry about Nash equilibriums. We just need to check the connectivity of the swap graph. Okay, so let's set up a protocol. So since we're dealing with the more complicated graphs, what we need to do, let me check, running a little bit behind. Actually, why don't we, I'll push ahead and then we'll take a break and then I'll resume. So for general protocol, we're going to need a vector of hash locks. And what we'll say, each contract has the same vector of hash locks, and we'll say we'll trigger if all of the secrets are revealed before anyone times out. So each secret is going to have a separate time lock. So we have a swap graph, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick some of them, we'll call them leaders, and each of the leaders is going to create a secret. And the idea here is the leaders have to form a feedback vertex set. The leaders must form a feedback vertex set. You can prove that this is necessary.
Just to cut all the
Yeah. So it has to be strongly connected, and you need a feedback vertex set. So each one of them publishes a contract on each outgoing arc. So this is a generalization of what we saw before. So here we have, each of these contracts has the same two hash locks. Each non-leader waits until the contract shows up on every incoming arc.
So I publish the key of the hash of the other guy?
Yeah. So all the leaders exchange their
So the leaders have a direct communication between them? Or?
they can communicate any way they want. They can communicate on blockchains if they want. So if you're non-leader, you have to wait for contracts on all the incoming edges, and then you can start publishing on the outgoing edges. And no other order works. If you do anything else, you can be cheated. This is a generalization of one of the scenarios I showed you at the very beginning. And then each arc receives a contract in time, order, diameter D. Here is a particularly evil graph where we have lots and lots of connectivity. So each arc is a proposed transfer. So A, publishes SI, It unlocks HI within delta. Now what we're going to do is something we didn't do before, is that when your forward is secret, you sign it before you pass it on so you can see what the path was that the secret took to get to you. We didn't need that before because the graph wasn't very complicated. But for highly connected graphs, we need to sign things. So here we have signatures, 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 and then we unlock things. So secret SI arrives along a path P from its source. Each link is signed, so I can tell exactly what the path the secret took was. Because a secret along one path is not the same as a secret along another path. So this unlocks the hash lock if P is a path from the source and you're received within length of path times delta. So, yeah?
What problem are we trying to solve by going to leaders and multiple secrets instead of one secret?
Oh, because if there's a cycle, if there's a cycle without a leader, then it's impossible. Because you can't, remember before each link had a timeout that increased by delta. But if you have a cycle with no leaders, then you can't do that because.
But how did you do the initial example with Alice, Bob, and Charlie? It was also circular?
It was also circular, but Alice was the leader. Alice generated a secret.
Okay, so we just assumed that Alice was a leader then, but now we elaborate the.
Well, here we also assume that we have Alice is a feedback vertex set. Because you remove Alice and it's no longer a cycle.
Anybody could be a leader. We just assume that somehow everybody agrees on who is a leader.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and same here, we assume that we have some way of picking out a feedback vertex set. So basically, if you check that your secret is fresh enough. And we need this to avoid this kind of a timeout sniper attack where I can grab a resource epsilon before it times out, and the other party can't do anything about it.
How many hash
It's the size of the feedback vertex set. So you know, if it's a single cycle, you only need one. But if you have one of these complicated
size measured by number of nodes in the
yeah. So here, I think every vertex is a feedback vertex set is the entire thing, because this is kind of pathological. It's very highly connected.
So why did you, in the original, in the more complicated, why did you take two nodes? One node can be also a feedback set. Go back to the one with the previous.
I'm not sure that's true, but we're running behind, so I don't want to go down in the weeds on that one. So basically, no order works, right? So non-leaders wait for contracts.
See, if you take, you can take one node out, for example, the leftmost P,
Yeah.
and it will not be strongly connected.
Trust me, it works. So the idea here is, right, so leader publishes contract in every outgoing arc. Non-leaders wait for contracts on incoming arcs. No other order works. Here we need to, when you get a secret, you look at how it got to you. And there's a theorem that says that no compliant party ends up underwater if you do things this way. And the swap finishes in time, order of diameter of the digraph. Number of bits is the feedback vertex set, you know, the set of leaders times the set of arcs. Other applications, cross-chain atomic transactions is what I'll talk about after the coffee break. Transactions are more complicated than swaps. In a swap, everybody just exchanges something and you're done. But you can imagine more complicated things where you want to take multiple steps, and we'll talk about that, mostly about what correctness means. I think this is applicable to off-chain transactions, you know, payment channels. You can imagine trying to do off-chain swaps, you know, where you're exchanging IOUs, and then at the end of the day, you can go back to all of your blockchains. So Lightning Network lives only on one blockchain, but I think using this kind of thing, you can generalize it to multiple blockchains. You can do off-chain atomic transactions, and that's something that if I have time, I'll talk about next time. Okay, yeah.
You provide the hash vectors in a different script?
I'm pretty sure that Bitcoin script can do this. So people have done atomic sort of pairwise swaps with Bitcoin script. Whether you can do vectors or not is a technical question. Bitcoin script gives me a headache, so I've never really tried to figure out whether you can do that or not. In principle you can. In practice, I don't actually know.
So this might be going back to a previous question, but it makes some sense to weight the arcs proportional to the value being transmitted on this arc. So then, in this situation, underwater might be better off than a deal or a discount. Something did you consider this case?
No, I can't. I can imagine underwater might be better than no deal under some circumstances. I can't imagine underwater shouldn't be better than deal, because if it was, you would have made a different deal. And I can't quite make that precise in real time. But there is this assumption having to do with the the strong Nash equilibrium assumption says that there isn't like a simpler subgraph that makes everyone happy. So you have no incentive to set up a big complicated deal if you would be satisfied with a smaller deal where everyone is equally or more happy.
Just that there might be a situation where one outgoing arc might be much heavier than the rest out.
Yeah. No, you can imagine a model where arcs have weights, and then you could, and it's interesting to ask what would change here if you did that. That's a way more complicated argument, and I like the fact that this is simple. We don't need to worry about weights and come up with complicated things. But that would be a natural generalization of this work to do that. And I think that would be a very interesting thing to do. Okay, let's do we have a coffee break now. So we're going to start.